The whole world may have been waiting for Hollow Knight Silksong's cocoon to finally crack open, but it sure doesn't seem to have been burdened by all that pressure. It stays close to the formula that made its predecessor so impressive, but still reshapes, refines, and revamps just about every aspect of it in ways both big and small. Silksong is unapologetically challenging, endlessly creative, and impressively thoughtful across both its gorgeous world and the stories that are told there. The metamorphosis may have taken almost a decade, but this butterfly has emerged as one of the biggest and boldest around. If you never played Hollow Knight, the main thing you need to know is that you seriously missed out and may want to go back and do that first. Silksong is certainly enhanced by having done so, but your journey across the brand new world of Farloom as the wise and confident Hornet stands on its own merits either way. Hornet is an excellent hero, and the top-notch writing throughout lets you get to know her through conversations with a charming cast of characters I grew to love. They range from adorable to goofy to genuinely touching, with standouts like the singing pilgrim Sherma running that whole gamut over the course of their own personal arcs. The larger story is made more explicit as a result of Hornet actually being able to talk, which is to its benefit, but there are still plenty of mysteries hiding in the corners of this world for you to piece together yourself. Farloom is a fascinating place, a dying land where hopeful bugs go on a pilgrimage from its lower levels all the way up to the shining peak of a spectacular cogwork city called the Citadel, though few actually survive the trek you now inadvertently find yourself on. Its story is about being tested and overcoming, about leaving the world a better place than you found it even when that's hard to do, and about persevering while still making time to give yourself grace. One of the greatest strengths of games as a creative medium is how they can tie themes and actions together, and Silksong pulls off that trick very well. You'll experience its themes firsthand because, just like Hollow Knight, Silksong will test you. This game is tough with a capital T, although the specific word I prefer to use is challenging. It doesn't kick you to the curb just for the sake of being hard, it challenges you to overcome obstacles that routinely feel insurmountable at first, but are nicely tuned to be conquered as your skill, knowledge, and toolset of earned abilities improves. Perhaps an extreme example of this is an area like Bile Water, which has very few respawn benches to rest at and includes some of the most punishing poison water I've seen in any game. I thought this area was unreasonably difficult when I first tried to force my way through it, but then I took a break, explored elsewhere, and returned hours later with new items and a better game plan that made it way easier. Farloom has so many branching paths that its roadblocks were able to feel substantial without killing my momentum. Rather than slamming your head against every wall you come across, Silksong is best approached by letting it come to you. You're never wasting your time by trying a different route, and you're routinely rewarded with useful upgrades and stunning sights alike. Every dial has been turned up to 11 visually. There's more color, more sparkle, and more variety, not to mention another truly incredible soundtrack. And whenever I thought I had finally found the limits of this map, I'd have to pick my jaw up off the floor as I stumbled into another new area with its own ecosystem, secrets, and hostile bugs. Those aggressive enemies and brutal boss fights follow the same go-with-the-flow philosophy as the areas around them. If you face them like this is a typical 3D action game, you might find yourself having a rough time. But if you treat Silksong like the platformer it really is, staying patient enough to focus on positioning while dodging and getting damage in where you can, then even its most savage enemies will start to melt. It's become a cliche to call combat a dance nowadays, but it truly is the best way to describe some of these encounters. I loved finding my rhythm and identifying openings in a combat system that rewards spatial awareness over button timings alone. Another reason the haymakers Silksong throws did more to motivate than frustrate is because in the grand scheme of difficult action games, this one is actually pretty dang forgiving. A lot of credit for that goes to the healing system, which lets you spend Silk, a resource you earn by hitting enemies, to recover a big chunk of health all at once, even while mid-air. It's encouraging to know that you could always heal back up to full mid-fight if you can just stay alive and get enough pokes in. Silksong doesn't mess around, but it generally puts that lifeline within grabbing distance. Bosses have reliable windows to safely heal in, and platforming areas frequently throw weaker enemies at you to stock up your Silk. I don't think it's a coincidence that the areas with that poison water are pretty much the only ones where the more common enemies will respawn right next to you. It might test you with tall orders, but it also gives you the means to meet them. I truly love the way Silksong challenged me, though there are some aspects of how developer Team Cherry has balanced the difficulty that could leave a sour taste in my mouth from time to time. To be clear, I think the tuning is impressively dialed in overall. Outside of a couple late game fights, I beat nearly every boss in a half dozen attempts or fewer, usually taking just 2 or 3 tries, which felt like a sweet spot in terms of providing pushback without ever making me want to throw down my controller. That said, it is a little jarring how many enemies and environmental hazards deal damage in chunks of 2 instead of just 1 compared to the original Hollow Knight. It can result in feel-bad moments even if the quote-unquote difficulty isn't technically out of whack. Health upgrades arrive so slowly that it's just a little discouraging when your life total is functionally cut in half by a boss that only deals damage in pairs. A similarly rough feeling can be caused by a few areas that put their respawn benches extremely far apart. Desperately searching for a checkpoint teeters on that line between thrilling danger and what am I doing wrong here dread. However, this bench placement isn't done without regard. Just like a boss has to be learned and overcome, the challenge of these areas is surviving to find that bench. And finally doing so is as satisfying as taking down any big bug. Silksong is a true blue platformer at its heart, and mastering its precise movement options across devious, spike-covered obstacle courses was a real treat. Silksong's expanded customization options give you more ways to tune your playstyle to your liking across both combat and platforming. You can unlock crests that change your basic attacks as if you were wielding an entirely new weapon. That might mean swapping the default diagonal down slash for the more vertically direct option provided by the Wanderer crest, or changing to the Beast crest for a claw-based attack that turns your burst heal into temporary lifesteal. My personal favorite was the Reaper crest, which has wide arcing attacks that knock extra Silk out of your foes after a heal. The new tool system that slots into these crests is also flexible in a way I appreciated a lot. In addition to equipable abilities that cost some Silk to use, all the tools you find are split into 3 color-coded categories. Red tools give you ammo-limited attacks like throwing knives, blue tools usually provide some sort of defensive effect like fire resistance, and yellow tools offer more general support options like marking Hornet's current location on your map. This separation is a notable improvement over Hollow Knight's single slot system because support effects and combat buffs are no longer fighting for the same limited space. Each crest has a different balance of the color-coded slots your tools go into as well, letting you prioritize the stuff you find yourself drawn to. For example, I used tool weapons more often than the special Silk abilities, so the drawback of the Architect crest, which swaps the Silk slot out for a third red tool, ended up fitting my playstyle pretty nicely for a bit. There's not much incentive to swap between these crests once you've found the one you're most comfortable with, but they all feel different enough to provide some genuine playstyle decisions. Of course, you have to find all of these different options first, and the laundry list of things waiting to be discovered across Farloom is impressively extensive. When I finally reached the end, my in-game timer was at just over 44 hours played and 96% completion, and I'm still hungry to dive back in to clear off that last 4%. There is a bit of an odd bump in the middle of that enjoyable road, however, as you can beat Silksong much faster than that. I'm going to avoid specifics and spoilers here as much as possible, but this really does feel worth discussing in broad strokes. That's because the main objective path is actually fairly achievable, and the first time I reached the credits was before I even hit the 30-hour mark. But that initial ending is mediocre. It has an abrupt and unsatisfying conclusion to the story that left me more confused than fulfilled. There's very little indication you could reach a different one either, but you can. In vague terms, doing so requires you to complete a lot of entirely unrelated activities that are framed as completely optional. A lot of that is excellent stuff, but it also includes some pretty uninspiring fetch quests that ask you to grind pointless items, which feels like an uncharacteristic step backwards in a sequel that takes so many forward. This is a similar-ish structure to unlocking the true ending of the original Hollow Knight, but the big difference is that the requirements for doing so there were directly tied into your character's journey of discovery, and the path you had to take was a little more intuitive as a result. Here, I was essentially left floundering for a little bit as I tried to figure out which checkboxes still needed to be arbitrarily ticked off. Silksong conceals what feels like roughly 15 to 20% of its content behind this false ending too, and that stuff is so good. It's probably some of the best writing in the entire story, and it shakes things up gameplay-wise in a pretty delightful way I won't spoil. I recognize this weird structural decision won't be a huge deal in the grand scheme of things. All of Silksong's secrets will be common knowledge soon enough, but it still feels like an odd choice. That all being said, it is legitimately cool how any two people can take very different paths on the way there. It took me 35 hours to find an area a friend of mine found in less than 10, and I unknowingly took such an unusual route to reach Act 2 that I solved a special puzzle area and beat an incredibly fun boss way before I was supposed to, giving me access to an entirely different part of the Citadel than I expect most people will initially see. Splintering paths like this are all over the place, and it's genuinely incredible that Silksong can be approached from so many different directions without ever feeling like you're doing something wrong. Hollow Knight Silksong has managed to live up to my high expectations, taking a game I absolutely adored and quite literally turning its dash into a full-on sprint. It's bigger, more vibrant, and just as creative as the original, and it tweaks every system in largely smart ways. Some of its quests and an oddly structured finale do make small missteps, but Team Cherry has nailed the overall balance between satisfying 2D platforming, enticing exploration, and nail-biting combat in a way few games do. It's also unapologetically challenging, punishing you in a way that can occasionally sting but never feels unforgiving. It asks you to overcome the unbeatable and to leave the world a better place than you found it while doing so, no matter how impossible that might seem.
Senior Guides producer Mitchell Saltzman here, alongside executive reviews editor Tom Marks on the other side of the screen this time. And we're here to talk a little more about your review for Hollow Knight Silksong. So Tom, of course, you are the, as I said, the executive reviews editor for IGN. That means you make sure that all the other reviews on IGN are all good to go. But you've also reviewed Celeste and you reviewed the original Hollow Knight. What made you really want to review Silksong?
Yeah, I mean, I sneak the reviews in when I have time for them, for the ones I'm really passionate about, the ones I really am excited to be playing. And Silksong, I've been waiting for this game for years, as so many people have, right? I played the first hands-on demo of this game in 2019 at the very last E3 at the Nintendo booth there. You know, so that was 6 years ago I first played this game. And I'm happy they took the time they did, because obviously I thought it turned out great, but it's just, I'm such a huge Hollow Knight fan. Platformers are my favorite genre. I love Metroidvanias generally, and platformers specifically just really, really draw me in, and yeah, I had a lot of reasons to be excited for this one.
For sure. So, one of the things in your review is that you make a distinction between Silksong's difficulty being more challenging than tough. Obviously, difficulty is one of the hot button issues with regards to this game. Can you dig a little more into that distinction and what ended up making Silksong's difficulty more of a positive for you than a negative? Yeah, so this is obviously going to be one of those things that is really subjective, right? Reviews are subjective. They are the opinion of the person who's playing the game. And if you have trouble with this game and that ruins the enjoyment of it for you, that is totally valid, and it's just different from my experience with it. And the tricky thing about Silksong is I think it is very, very hard. It's a very tough game, but I think they also, as I said in my review, do a lot of things to allow you to overcome that. So I didn't ever, like, there were only, I think the longest I ever got stuck on a boss outside of the final boss, which I will not spoil, but that one did take me a very, very long time.
The longest I ever got stuck on just a boss during the game was about a half hour. It was maybe a dozen attempts, right? So, and most of them took me a lot less than that. And so for what I like, what I'm good at in games, it was it was very dialed in, right? And I think that's another reason why one of the things I didn't dig into the review, but, you know, I wanted to, and I think is disappointing, is I think there should have been accessibility options in this game to adjust things to the way you want so that more people could play it if they wanted to, in the way that we saw in something like Celeste. I'm surprised that the tools Celeste introduced with, hey, you can just tune the game speed down 10% if you want, that sort of thing. I'm surprised that more games hadn't picked that up in the years that followed, and I'm disappointed not to see something like it here, but at the same time, for who I am and what I like in these games, this was really good for me, and I think there's a distinct difference between a game that is hard for the sake of being hard, that just wants you to feel punished by it. Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, right, is a game that is just trying to make you feel bad. And that's sort of the design of it, is this is really brutal, it's really unfair at times, and it is just trying to make you overcome that through sheer force of will. I don't think that's what Silksong is doing. I don't think Silksong is ever just trying to make you feel bad about what you're doing, or rub your face in the dirt, or really try to just punish you for the sake of punishing you. I think when it does those things, it's doing it very intentionally.
One of the things I wanted to also touch upon, you said in 2018 in a PC Gamer review that Hollow Knight is one of the best games you've ever played, pretty much full stop. Does that opinion still hold up in 2025, and where does Silksong stand in that kind of conversation?
Yeah, it's such a tough question, right? Because I'm a big believer in you gotta let recency bias cool off, right? We just finished this, we're in the middle of playing it, right? And how it stacks up is gonna be one of those things that I think I'm not really gonna know until I've played this game again, probably all the way through. But I think that the statement that Hollow Knight is one of the best games I've ever played does hold up. I think that this game does not diminish or, you know, make me not want to return to Hollow Knight ever. But also it does do things that are going to... What's the right way to put this? The sprint, I guess, is the easiest way to explain this. The fact that you had to spam dash in Hollow Knight and now you can just sprint in Silksong is one of those things where you're like, wow, that is just objectively better. That is just... It is going to make Hollow Knight feel clunkier to go back and play. And the question is, do all of these improvements that Hollow Knight makes, or Silksong makes, because it makes a ton of them, right? It makes a ton of really smart, small tweaks that just make the game feel faster, a little sharper, a little more interesting. The visual design of the background, it's being more vibrant, all those things add up. But then also, does the things it does differently that maybe aren't quite as interesting or aren't quite as surprising, do those then balance out in a different way? And so I don't know exactly how that's going to shake out on all of this. Because again, the other thing is it's hard to compare when I replay Hollow Knight. The first time I played Hollow Knight, that game kicked my butt, right? Like, it was so hard. Now I can beat that game very quickly because I know it so well, and I understand the bosses and I understand how to move through its world efficiently. I don't have that with Silksong yet. So comparing my first playthrough of Silksong with my fourth of Hollow Knight is sort of apples to oranges in terms of where I am mentally with those games. So I think it's going to take me another playthrough of this game to really say, do I like this more or do I like this less? I do know that it's doing a lot of things better, but we'll see beyond that.
All right, and then final question. I didn't prep you for this, but what is your favorite crest in Silksong? What's the one that got you through to the end?
That's an easy one. That's the Reaper crest.
All the way through?
I switched around a bit. I went with the Architect for a little bit because I liked the extra tool weapons. The tools are so good in this game. And I dug the drill, but it ended up kind of... I didn't like the down jump, the down attack of that one quite as much. I really love the Reaper. It is again, so forgiving, where if you get a heal and then get a few hits in, your Silk fills back up a lot very quickly. And then there is one I won't go into detail on because I believe you can only get it in Act 3 that is really different and weird and cool, and I am excited to play with that one more as I try to get that last 4% to hit 100%. I'm excited now that I'm not trying to be like quite as perfectly optimal in my play. I'm excited to play around with that one more, but I'm not going to spoil that one.
All right, Tom. Well, thank you so much for your time. If you want more Tom Marks, you can check out his review of Kirby and the Forgotten Land for the Switch 2. The Switch 2 version, rather. And if you want more recent reviews, you can check out our review of Borderlands 4. And, of course, for everything else, keep it here on IGN.